Hello everyone, Mrs. Edstrom here. We're going to talk about subtracting with a number line. So if you like number lines, this is the method for you. If you do not like number lines, there is another video on using tiles that you can take a look at. So let's start talking about number lines. So on a number line, we want to make sure we're using arrows on the ends because they go on forever. And we do want to make sure we're always labeling our number line. I've noticed that some people are forgetting which side have negatives and which side is positive. Sometimes I even like to label where my arrows are. So the left side over here, this is our more negative side. That's the negative numbers are on that side of 0, and as we move in that direction, our numbers are getting smaller. They're heading towards those negatives. And our right-hand side is the positive side. It's moving to larger numbers. It is the positive side of 0. So sometimes it is helpful to label that. What we can get to from there is we can kind of see that at any given point on this number line, we can only move in two directions. We can move towards the smaller negative numbers, or we can move towards the maybe more positive side, the larger number side. We can only move in two directions. So we have to pick which direction we're moving in. So that's kind of what we're doing when we are looking at this method, is we're going to start off with an equation or an expression, and then we're going to display that on here, show where it starts, and show which direction we're moving, and go ahead and count. So for example, real quick here, if I had 5 plus 4, I would start off at 5. Plus means I'm going to move to the positive side, and I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4. Now most of us know 5 plus 4 in our head, and we don't need to map it out on the number line. But as soon as we throw negatives and subtraction in there, walking through the method of using the number line can be really helpful. So we're going to start off with, we're going to take a look here at the problem, 6 minus 8. So 6 minus 8. The first thing I like to do on my number line is find my starting number. So my starting number is 6. That is right here. I even label it sometimes. This is my start. And then subtraction. So right now I'm working with positive numbers. I see subtraction. I also see subtraction over here, and that's part of this. This method that can help you is subtraction moves to the left. Subtraction means to take away. It's going to be less than, right? We're moving towards the less than numbers, which means we're going to subtract 8. So we're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Ooh, that was a really bad one. 8. And we see where we end up. So right now we are ending up at -2. So that means when we are looking for our answer, we have it at -2. Let's take a look at another one. So do you notice anything different about this number line? Yeah, I'm only counting by 2s. You'll notice that every line is there. I still have my line for 1 and 3 and -1 and -3. I just didn't label them. Sometimes it can get messy to label every single line. It's okay to label every other, but we need to make sure we're being consistent and that each line is still counting by 1s. So on this problem, we're going to start off with -6 minus 4. -6 minus 4. This really doesn't change the process from before at all. We're starting off at -6 here, so that negative number is simply our starting place. So this -6, that's where we are starting. And again, we have -4. So if we didn't label our two sides, we might take a moment to remember that this is our more negative side. This is our more positive side. So subtraction is going to move to the left. And we're counting 4 places. 1, 2, 3, 4. So -10 here. By the way, I didn't mention this earlier. If you're wanting to take notes on this part of things, you are more than welcome to, but we are going to get our notes out more specifically in just a minute here. So subtraction is just moving to that left-hand side. But what happens, let me flip this over here. What happens when we suddenly have something that looks like this? Just like before, we still have our negative side, our positive side, and we're starting off at that -2 right here. The first thing that I would say when I see this is I see that subtraction, and I know that subtraction means I am moving to the left. That's what we've been doing. But what we have to remember is we moved to the left when we were subtracting a positive number. And that positive number and the negative number here, it makes a big difference that it's a negative number. That negative number actually tells us that we need to switch directions. So instead of moving towards our negative smaller numbers, we're going to switch directions and count that way our 7 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to end at 5. One way to think about it is you can think about our tightrope walker. The fact that it says subtraction might mean that they're now facing the subtraction direction, but they want to go -7 steps. So instead of walking forwards 7, they're gonna walk backwards 7. So just kind of a few different things that you can look at there. We're gonna take some notes. So you may have taken some notes on that, and that is great, but I wanna make sure we formalize how we show examples in our notes. So the first thing we want to do is we want to write our essential question, and we want to fill out our date. So you can fill in today's date, and the essential question is, how do I subtract with negative numbers? Oh, barely made it fit. There we go. How do I subtract with negative numbers? This essential question, remember, it's what can kind of help us as we go through this lesson to make sure when we want to come back to things, we know what we're answering. So the first thing, there's tiles over here. We're not going to look at tiles. We're just formalizing in our notes an example problem. If you want to go back and look at the tile video later, you can. So remember, the first thing that I'm going to note here is this first number. This is where you start. Where you start on the number line. So in this case, I'm going to find 4 on my number line. That's where I start. My subtraction sign or positive sign, this tells you the initial direction. So either towards your subtraction or negative side, or towards our addition or positive side. So that subtraction sign there, that's going to tell you the initial direction that we're facing in, that we're going to want to go in. Our last number here, we are just going to count that many place values. So in this case, we would count 5 places. But if it's negative, we have to switch directions. If it's negative, we have to switch directions. So in this case, our initial thing tells us subtraction. We're heading to the left. But our -5 tells me to switch back and go the other way. So I'm counting over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to end up at 9. So what you might notice, and this is what we talked about at the start of this video, is there's only two directions. There's the negative direction, the positive direction. Either I'm subtracting or I'm adding. So as soon as we throw in negatives, we're switching to the other direction. So you might have noticed this. When we have plus and negative, our initial direction is adding, but the negative tells us to switch directions. It's the same exact thing as having a subtraction problem. And likewise with subtraction down here, when we start at our 5 and our initial direction is subtraction, but the negative number tells us to go backwards and go the other way, we're heading in that positive direction, which means at the end of the day, it is the same thing as adding. So when we're looking at subtracting and adding, there's only two options. We're going to head to the left or we're going to head to the right. When we have a negative number as our second number, we're going to switch directions from whatever our sign tells us. This first number, if it's negative, remember that's just the starting number. So that negative doesn't change anything, it just changes where you start. So take a moment, make sure that your notes have a good example for you to remember to go back. So make sure you've labeled everything in our problem so that when you go to try these on your own, you can remember that you're starting at this first number. You're picking that initial direction based off of the operation, addition or subtraction. And then you are counting in the however many there are here. But if it is negative, before you count, you need to switch direction.